Well, welcome to our very first Sycamore View Church podcast. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Anna Moser, and I've been the children's minister at Sycamore View for almost 8 years. And I'm here with our very first guest, who's also on staff here at Sycamore View, our very own lead minister, Josh Ross. Welcome, Josh.
Can you believe we're doing this?
No.
This is awesome. We've been looking forward to this for a long time. Here we are.
We have. We've been talking about how to celebrate our church turning 50 in 2028 and for a couple of years now. And I remember when we started brainstorming how to share the stories of our church, I knew that I think it'd be really fun to make a podcast out of this. And I'm an avid podcast listener, but I've never actually been behind a mic. And it's kind of surreal, but I'm really excited about this. I think this will be a really great way to get these stories out there. So,
well, I think you're a natural. It's going to go great. All right.
Thanks.
You and I both been in the podcast game for a long time as far as listening to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could remember the first podcast I ever listened to, and I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't either.
But if you remember back in 2017, I had a temporary podcast.
Re-entry, yeah.
It is a re-entry. So I knew it was only going to last like 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
I walked into the office one day, and you and Fawn were in there, and you were playing me at like two times the speed or half speed. And I don't even know if you were diving into the content, but I just wanted you to know, as people listen to this podcast, nobody's going to do that to you. All right? It's going to be normal speed.
I truly hope not.
But I mean, you and I, we probably listen to more podcasts than we listen to music, I would think. At least for me, I think, I think you too.
Same.
So as the host of this podcast now, like when it comes to a podcast game, like who inspires you? When you listen to a podcast, or you knew you were going to host one, who are you like, I want to do a podcast like so-and-so, or that person inspires me? Who would it be?
Definitely Annie F. Downs. She has a podcast called That Sounds Fun with Annie F. Downs. She also does a Reading Through the Gospels in a Year podcast that I listen to. So she's just really fun. Typical Enneagram 7, which I am not, but you are. So I love listening to her. Yeah. She asks the best questions and has a really neat perspective. And I feel like we're friends because I listen to her so much, but it's very one-sided friendship. I've never met her, but hopefully one day.
Anybody who listens to an Annie podcast, you feel like we know each other. We're really good friends. So I get it.
Yeah, she brings everybody in, and it's just awesome. So I just hope that someday we'll be able to meet and I could tell her how inspirational she's been to me that I even am starting a podcast for our church. So can you take us back to when you've been dreaming about 2028 for several years now, and you've come up with this really neat idea called 50 for 50. So I just kind of wanted you to explain to us how you came up with that idea and what your vision is for this season.
Yeah, super pumped about the 50 for 50 idea. So let me start with this. We all love stories. Like, I love stories. Sometimes we talk about how we live in a time right now where the best story wins. Like, whoever has the best narrative, that's the narrative people are going to follow. And when you think about the way the story of God was shared, and I'm not trying to get too theological, though I guess I don't need to apologize for that right now, but like in the Old Testament, like every family, like as grandparents or moms and dads sat down with their kids to share the stories of God. They're not opening up a Bible or reading some Advent book. I mean, I love that we have those things, but it was all about how are you telling the story of God? Like, how are you telling the stories of the faithfulness of God in and through your life? And that's how this story that we have now has been handed on to the next generation. So the power of story has been how the story of God has continued for now thousands of years. So with that said, and I laugh about this, Anna, because we've talked about it a couple of times. So ESPN, Sports Center, right?
Yeah, my favorite.
And sometimes you and I are in restaurants, and I'm like, Anna, that game that's up there, can you give me a little feedback on what it was like when you watched it last night? You'll just play along with me. But so when ESPN turned 30 years old, they did a 30 for 30. 30 stories celebrating 30 years of sports and in the ESPN era. So these were all like mini documentaries. So, 30 minutes, some of them were an hour. And that idea always just resonated with me. So I thought, oh man, okay, what about a 50 for 50? And some of that was, I knew 2028 was going to get here, where we turn 50. And I've seen a lot of churches turn 50 or 75 or 100 or celebrate some of these milestones. And not that it's wrong just to get to a date and you have a big potluck and you invite people in for a worship service. Like, I think that's celebratory in itself. But I guess I was just thinking, is there something bigger, better, more efficient, more visionary that we could do? So that's where I was like, what if we did a 50 for 50? Now, we're not doing documentaries.
No.
So these aren't going to be 30-minute documentaries. But what about 50 stories over 50 months celebrating 50 years of God's faithfulness? Like, that sounded good. And I think that when all of us think about what that can do for our church, there is something exciting about that.
Yeah. I love stories. And really the only time I get into sports is when I know the backstories of the players. I love the Olympics when you get to know where these athletes came from and their story. So I do think this is going to be like a super formative time for our church because like me and you, I've only been here for a brief time in the overall history of our church. And so each month there's going to be a video that drops to kind of share one of those stories. And then we're going to release a podcast because I thought, man, you can only capture so much in just like a 3 to 5 minute video. But sitting down with somebody and interviewing them and hearing their perspective on these really pivotal moments in our church, I think will help that story live on for the next generation. And I'm excited because I haven't been here for a lot of these stories, but I've heard them. And so I'm excited to sit down and learn more about them, kind of do a deep dive into them with the podcast for those that are nerdy like me and want to know more than a video can allow. I think this is going to be a really great way to share those stories. So thank you for your leadership in this, and I'm excited about what it's going to do for our church.
Yeah, me too. And Caroline, who's on staff with us now, has helped set up a really good, like, I'm sure we're going to post a few of these pictures when people are up here, like, filming these podcasts of just the cool setup that we have that I think we're all super excited about. Yeah. So the stories we got were collected because we did host probably 7 or 8 kind of smaller groups over the last year. I think I want to say about 225 people in our church attended one of these settings, just these small group times that we had. So it's not like you and me and a few of us sat down and thought, what are the 50 stories we want to tell? But these were stories that were retold by people in our church. They're stories that celebrate all 5 decades. So it's not like, let's only tell the stories of the last 10 years. We've tried to go back to every decade. What are formative stories or events or people that we need to tell these stories? So that's how it came about. We've already listed out kind of what all 50 of them are.
Yeah. As you look over the list, are there any that you were like most excited for our church to hear about?
I was afraid you were going to ask that question because, of course, I've looked at this list and I've prayed over this list and I've shared it with other people. And so we have like when we knew it was going to be tricky if we decided to tell stories about people, because where does that stop? Like, you could tell 50 stories about people, but we're also telling stories about events and ministries. But, I knew, man, if Anna asked this question, I am excited about Trisha Lillard, who has meant so much to our church. The story that we'll do, it's probably going to be 3 years from now, but on Lee Brown, who I think God used as a prophet and maybe angel in our church. I'm excited about, and this probably isn't answering your question specifically, I'm excited about, for those of us who've only been here for 10 or 20 years, so me, 16, almost 16 years, going back to hear some of these stories from the 80s and 90s that taught our church about risk and about faith. I'm excited about some of those. So what about you, though? Is there one that sticks out to you that you're excited about?
Oh, man, there's so many, because I do children's ministry, just so many things that I've just heard about happening in the past. Like, we had a clown ministry at one point, and Family Factory, and all of these things that have shaped, who my volunteers are and the children's ministry at our church. And so I think that'll be really neat to hear more about those things that happened before I even got here, and find out what was learned from those and the things that have shaped us the most. So I'm excited about that, and the youth ministry through the ages, and just it'll be really neat to dive into that.
Yeah. So I know we first started talking about this, 2 years ago, probably in 2021. Yeah. And then maybe 6 months ago or so, we kind of had more of an idea on 50 for 50. And then the podcast idea was shared. And then I remember you like coming right to my office and you're like, I would love to host a podcast. What excites you about doing this? Like, we're going to hear your voice. You're going to be facilitating these conversations every month. What excites you about that?
I think this is just an outlet that the next generation uses a lot. And I thought, what a great way to try to engage them in this 50 for 50 idea in a way that they are already engaged. So I want to do that. And like I said, I just think that hearing more about the stories will help me understand how it's shaped who we are today and kind of the ripple effect of the people and the events that I don't really know all about. So I think it'll give me a new appreciation for our church and who we're becoming. And I hope that it ignites that same fire for others, especially in the next generation. So, yeah.
I think you're right, and we're gonna have to do just a little equipping with our church with Caroline's help for some people like where to find a podcast.
Yes, for sure.
It's on our device, so we'll be able to help some people get there. But I think people are they're gonna love this, and I think you're the right person to host these conversations.
Thanks, I'm excited. So I was trying to think of a question to ask everybody, kind of at the end, to kind of unite this whole series. So I'm gonna ask it to you today since you're our first guest. So I need you to tell me who your favorite staff member is over the 50 years. I'm just kidding. That's not going to be the question.
But there's only one answer, right?
Yeah, I'm sitting
you, of course.
You have to choose me. No, the question is going to be, I would like each guest to give us like a one sentence. Sometimes you encourage us to just, when we pray in groups, to have like a one sentence prayer request or hope for our church. And I thought that would be really neat to hear each person's kind of hope or prayer for Sycamore View as we, we're looking back at 50 years, but we're also looking forward and what you're hoping for the next 50 years of our church's history and where we're moving next. So then we can string those all together at the end and just have this beautiful vision of our church's future. So you're going to be the first one. So no pressure.
No pressure. And one sentence, right?
One sentence.
So
I mean,
can't
Paul's
have the comma
were
run
really
on sentence.
But yeah.
No, I love the question, and it is exciting to think about stringing these all together. I think my response would be this: to tell a good story, you have to live a good story. That's the sentence. Brief elaboration on that. We all want to tell good stories, but telling good stories isn't just because you read books. It's because you choose to live a life. And I think for Sycamore View, it has been 5 decades of risk and faith and not being afraid to try some things. And because of that, we're able to tell 50 years of stories of, we get to tell them because people have lived really good stories of faith. So to tell a good story, you have to live a good story.
I like it. Thank you, Josh, for being our very first inaugural guest.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
Join us next month. We'll be diving into our very first story about why we decided to stay at 1910 Sycamore View Road.
Thanks, Anna.